You're listening to Al Pastor, the show that helps you love God, love your neighbor, and eat more tacos. I'm your host, Pastor Brian. Welcome to the show. Well, hello. Happy Friday to everybody out there that is tuning in today. Hopefully I grabbed your attention with this title. Today's podcast is going to come out of Genesis 8:20 through 9:17, which is our reading for this Friday. And I'm calling it Rainbows and Unicorns. Yes, you heard me right. Rainbows and unicorns. So if you are happy about that, then good for you. Sometimes I forget that I have these little toys. I've got all these nice little sound effects, but let's get on with it. Rainbows and unicorns. All right, so we're going to start right up at the top, Genesis 8 and verse 20, and I'll get into the unicorns because we should celebrate, because unicorns were in the ark. Believe it or not, they were in the ark. They came off the ark, and God blessed the unicorns. Let's read it. Verse 20, Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. The first thing that I like out of this is that it says that Noah built an altar to the Lord. We should pause, we should reflect on that, and we should think about the implications of it. I mean, here's Noah. The first thing he does is honor the one who brought him through. And he built an altar. There's also something else that's communicated in this passage, which is the knowledge that had been handed down from Adam, as we talked about in Genesis chapter 4 with Cain and Abel, that without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sin. So what he offered to God is an offering of thanksgiving, and it's also an offering of, in a sense, of atonement as well. And so just a really, really beautiful picture. And then, of course, verse 21, And the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, and the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. And so when God goes on in chapter 9, verse 1, he blesses them. Right? It says, and God blessed Noah, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Here we have the recasting, in a sense, of new creation, right? New creation. We have creation, we have sin, the fall, we have redemption, and now we're in this other cycle. And so the mandate remains the same, as to be fruitful and to multiply. Also, I just skipped right over verse 22, and that's okay. You're probably sitting there saying, when are you going to get to the unicorns, right? I will. So hold on. Verse 22, it says, while the earth remained, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Right here, this is something that we can pay attention to. So depending on how many of you have done a deep dive in the Genesis record, what we understand now is that the world that then was, the world that was, that's the way that Peter would phrase it in 2 Peter, somewhere around in chapter 2, when he talks about the flood, he uses the phrase, the world that was. Could be 2 Peter 2, somewhere between in the teens, one of those verses. The earth has dramatically changed and shifted now. There is cold, heat, summer, winter. And this is all as a result of this vapor canopy that has, from the windows of heaven, God opened those up. This vapor canopy from the waters that had been separated has completely collapsed. Now we have, the weather patterns have shifted. And so, verse 2, so chapter 9, verse 1, so God blesses him, notice the mandate. Verse 2, and the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food to you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. So verse 3 is also very, very important. Why is that important? Because it is at this time that God now allows the eating of flesh. Prior to this, it can be debated. So don't take this with a grain of salt, okay? But I do believe that this is the case. I believe this is the first case of carnivorous eating, of meat eating from man. Originally, man was eating plants, plant-based diet. I'm not gonna say he's a vegan. I'm not gonna say he's a vegetarian. But if you want to call it that, then go ahead. But now Noah's a carnivore. I like that because I'm doing a carnivore diet, by the way, right now. So let's see. Verse 4. Here's the stipulation. You're allowed to eat meat now, Noah, but you shall not eat flesh with its life. That is its blood. So notice in verse 4 and then back up to 8:20. Notice the two. There's a parallel here. There's an altar to the Lord. And now we begin to understand this revelation of what the sacrifice does. The shedding of blood is revealed even further in verse 4 because he says that the life is in the blood. The life is in the blood. Without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sin. Verse 5, this is going to be very interesting, the next few verses. And for your lifeblood, I will require a reckoning. So he's saying, vengeance is going to be mine. This is what God's saying. From every beast, I will require it, and from man. So notice the equality here, from beast and man. From his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for the life of man. This is where we get the adage, what we're going to see in the covenant at Sinai, which is an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. So he says, notice that last phrase, from his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Verse 6, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. So notice the reason. There's something to do with being made in the image of God. We would say it like this: life is sacred, right? All life is sacred. And so what was happening prior to the flood? Remember, in Genesis chapter 6, God saw that the evilness, the wickedness, the thoughts of their imagination was evil continually. There was a lot of bloodshed. And there seemed to be no justice. Seemed to be. But God did carry out justice. And the flood was God's judgment, God's wrath. But we're seeing grace right now as well. Verse 7, and you be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth and multiply it. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him. So let me go ahead and get to the unicorn, because otherwise I'm going to go through all these scriptures and then I'll just keep talking. Here's the unicorns. The unicorn came off the ark. How? Well, back then, up until many, many, many years ago, rhinoceros were known. There was a certain breed, one-horned rhinoceros. And I'll probably butcher the name in Latin. I don't pretend to know Latin, so don't walk away and say, ooh, Pastor Brian was speaking Latin. But the Latin name for a one-horned rhinoceros is, I'm making this up now, Unicornus rhinoceros, something like that. Sounds good, right? You can Google it if you want to. But that's the original unicorn. And so that kind of cracks me up because there are some critics of the King James, the authorized, the old King James, not the new King James, the old. And in the old King James, it uses the word unicorn. And so I like to poke fun because people say, oh, you read a Bible that has unicorns in it. Well, duh, it's a rhino. That's what it was referencing. So there's my unicorn bit. I hope you liked it. Thank you. Thank you. That's the unicorn. All right, let's go into the rainbows now. Hey, we'll talk about some rainbows. Let's go down. So God is establishing his covenant. Very, very significant. God made a promise prior to the flood of the covenant, but now we see the fulfillment of that covenant. This is also important because we see the first mention of an altar being built. First, that's the first mention of an altar being built. It's implied prior, because it's implied in Genesis 4. If Cain and Abel were to come to offer something to God, it would be, the implication is that there would be an altar. But this is the first time that man has built an altar. So it's believed that the first altar was there at the foot of the cherubim at the entrance of the garden. Okay, so this is a little bit different. So we see the first mention of man building an altar. We also see the fulfillment or the establishment of the promise. So God promised, now he is implementing the covenant that he promised. And this covenant is for everyone. There's nothing attached to this. This is a universal covenant. And the covenant, okay, I want you to look, verse 9. He says, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring and with every living creature that's with you. The birds, the livestock, the beasts, and as many as came out of the ark is for every beast of the earth. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? God made a covenant with the animals too. And in verse 12, he says, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds. I just realized something, folks. I'm reading my ESV again. I hope I didn't confuse you on the language. Normally I do. I read out of the New King James, but for some reason, and the reason that I notice this because ESV uses the word bow, whereas the New King James Version uses the word rainbow. So you know what? I'm glad that I ended up reading the ESV. So that actually kind of brings me to my point. The word for rainbow is the word bow. So ESV is, you could argue, a little bit more of an accurate translation at this point. Why is that important? Because it's believed that God put down his weapon. He laid it down in a sign of peace. He came, he judged, he made war, and now it is time for peace. And so that word bow, I encourage you, if you want to study it out, go ahead and study it. It is the same word like for a bow and an arrow. So this visible sign is a rain, we would say a rainbow. Why do we say rain? Because it's associated with, after the rain and the way the sunlight comes through. We don't have to get into all that, but you know where I'm going with that, right? So the bow is seen in the clouds, and it's a reminder of the covenant. Now, why is the bow colored? Again, don't take my word for it, but I'm going to give you a few speculations. It's I'm not trying to get all mystical and woo-woo stuff here, but if you were to track this theme, you could search bow, right? And you're going to see that it's used like bow and arrow. But when we look at the way it's translated as rainbow in that context, we're going to see the next time that it's mentioned is going to be in Ezekiel 1:28. Let me read it to you. And if you want to pause and look it up, you can do that. I'll give you just a second. If you don't, here it is, Ezekiel 1:28. Ezekiel's in the throne room, and he's having a vision, and he is at the throne room of God. Notice what he says here. He says, I'm going to have to read a verse up because this sentence just jumping in. He says, also from the appearance of his waist and upward, I saw as it were the color of amber with the appearance of fire all around it. And from the appearance of his waist downward, I saw as it were the appearance of fire with brightness all around, like the appearance of a rainbow in a cloud on a rainy day. So was the appearance of the brightness all around it. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of God. So can you believe that? He described a rainbow at the throne room of God. Why would there be a rainbow there? Well, we can get a little bit more information, and this comes from Revelation 4:3. This is the next time that we see an appearance of a rainbow. I'm going to read Revelation chapter 4, verses 1, 2, and 3. John says, "After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, 'Come up here, and I will show you things which must take place after this.' Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. And he who sat there was like a jasper and a sardis stone in appearance. And there was a rainbow around the throne in appearance like an emerald." Interesting, isn't it? So you can say it like this. The rainbow, God set it as a pledge. He set it as a pledge for himself, as a promise of his faithfulness, as a promise of his peace, and as a promise of his grace. Primarily that he would never flood the earth again. This is what we read in Genesis chapter 9. Sorry, my brain went blank. Genesis chapter 9, that he would never flood the earth again. So imagine this picture. You see a rainbow. It goes into the cloud. Now, I'm not saying that this happens, but imagine that rainbow that went into the cloud connects into the throne room of God. That's kind of the picture that we have here. So let's get into the bow here just a little bit more. If it is a weapon of war, what is interesting is the next time that we see bow, okay, because that's the word. I know it says rainbow in the New King James, but just do your word search. Okay, so I'm gonna do this now. I'm gonna click Bible Word Study. And what you're gonna see is you're gonna see that it is a weapon and it's a bow. We're gonna see a man by the name of Nimrod when we get to Genesis chapter number 6, or 10, sorry. I think it's 10, yes, 10. And it says that Nimrod became a mighty man. And he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, it doesn't mean that he was doing it for the Lord. The word before means like literally in the Lord's face. That's what the word before means. To give you an example, like in the 10 Commandments, "You shall have no other gods before me." The literal rendering of that would be, "You shall have no other gods before my face." You're like, what? Yes, that's what it is. So when it says, let me pull up the scripture here. I got to find it, of Nimrod. Where are you, Nimrod? Yep, Genesis 10:9. Genesis 10:9 describes Nimrod. I'm going to start in Genesis 10, verse 8. "Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on earth." We will cover part of this in Bible study, but this means that he became a mighty one. The word is gibber. And a very important word. "He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of," notice, whose kingdom? His kingdom was Babel. So the idea is, again, that Nimrod was not like Tim Tebow out with whatever scriptures under his eyes, he plays football. I play football for the Lord. Nothing wrong with Tim Tebow. I'm not knocking him. But what I'm saying is sometimes people get this idea like, Nimrod was out hunting. No, he was hunting in the Lord's face. Like if I say in your face, I don't know if, I think as a little kid, we used to be like, boom, in your face. It kind of carries that idea. Nimrod was doing this to spite the Lord. So notice in Genesis chapter 9, God, if this is the imagery, God puts as a sign of his covenant, as a sign of peace, he's saying, I am lowering the weapons of my warfare that I just made. My bow is now set in the sky. By the way, I didn't tell you why I think it's all colored that way. I think it's all colored that way. Yes, we understand this, some of the science. You can, naturalize it all you want to from the different rays of the sun. But why is it that color in heaven? Well, it's the radiance or the splendor. It's the glory of God. That's what we find out from Ezekiel. So if you go back and look at Ezekiel, Ezekiel's very explicit. It's the glory of God. But it's also a reflection of the jewelry, all of the precious jewels that are in there, like sardis and topaz and all of those jewels. By the way, wasn't that the same kind of jewels that we read about in Ezekiel that Lucifer was covered with? And those are the same jewels that the high priest would wear on his breastplate. Colors of the rainbow, isn't it? So that's just a little tidbit on there. So anyway, back to Nimrod. Mighty hunter before the Lord. So it's believed the Lord put his bow down. Guess who picked it up? In defiance of God. In defiance and saying, in your face, God. And when it says he's a hunter, it's not just of animals. What do you think Nimrod was doing? He was also hunting men. Nimrod was not a good man. And so what we just read in the covenant from Genesis 9:4, where God said, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. From the image of God he made man. Okay, that's in Genesis 9, verse 6. I feel like I'm going all, I hope you're still following me. Genesis 9:6, whoever sheds man's blood, by his blood shall be shed. For the image of God he made man. What is one way that you can get back at God? By going after his image. This has been the MO of Satan from the very beginning, right? Cain rose up and killed Abel. Abel was in, and if you go back, they begot sons in their own image. It's amazing. So this whole image thing is what Satan is after. Now, this gives us some insight into Nimrod. So I'll probably come back to this just a little bit. I'll probably do a deeper dive on Bible study. We'll see. Depends on how many folks are interested in that. But anyway, last little thing. You say, well, how can the rainbow be a weapon of God? Wouldn't it just be a rainbow? Well, there's something that's really amazing because there's another spot that there is a rainbow. And let me see it. Well, I thought I had it loaded up. Well, let me see if I can find it. I think it's Revelation chapter 10. It is. Let me read this to you. I saw still another mighty angel coming down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was on his head. Very, very interesting. His face was like the sun, and his feet like pillars of fire. Now, I want you to know right off the bat, there's debate as to whether or not this is Jesus. I think that there's plenty of evidence that this very well is Jesus, although the language uses the word of angels, but we won't, that's a separate topic, okay? But Revelation 10:1, there is a mighty angel coming down from heaven, clothed with a cloud. Notice how he's dressed. He's dressed in white. A rainbow's on his head. A rainbow. What is that all about? Why would he come down? We're in the book of Revelation. This is about the tribulation. This is about judgment. You tell me, is this an intimidating figure of a man in white with a rainbow over his head coming down? I don't see it that way. I don't. It's kind of comical when we impose. Yes, I understand visually we see it, but let's just go on. His face was like the sun and his feet like pillars of fire. He had a little book open in his hand, and he set his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. And he cried with a loud voice as when a lion roars. When he cried out, here's the point. And I know you're listening. I don't know if you're reading this with me in this section, but there's Revelation chapter 10, verse 3. When he cried out, 7 thunders uttered their voices. Here's the phrase. 7 thunders uttered their voices. What is the 7 thunders? Verse 4. Now when the seven thunders uttered their voices, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, seal up the things which the seven thunders uttered, and do not write them. Oh boy. Now, let me see if I can put this all together for you. The seven thunders. Somebody's texting me. See, look, this is like the second, third night in a row that I forget to turn on my do not disturb. That's okay. Okay, where was I? Oh boy, I'm really butchering. I feel like I'm butchering this podcast, but that's okay. Okay, Revelation 10:3. Seven thunders. What is this in connection with it? With the rainbow? Guess what God has done? God is now picking his bow back up. Yes, you heard me right. God laid it down in the flood, and he promised that he would never do what? He would never flood the earth again. Now he's picking up his bow once again for judgment. But this time, it's going to be by fire. Like he's going to come, he's going to devour, he's going to have a sword in his hand. This right here is Jesus himself that has picked up the bow. That's why the bow is over his head. What's the seven thunders? Seven thunders. So Revelation 10 verse 3, the seven thunders, I'm going to tell you, it is Psalm 29. Yes. Now, am I saying like 100% these are the thunders? Like the exact thunders? Well, no, but I'm going to give you seven thunders that happen in the Old Testament. Psalm 29. Psalm 29 is a psalm about the flood. We are given some information that God did prior to the flood. And guess what God did before the flood? He announced seven thunders, seven judgments, and it's recounted here in Psalm 24. So let's read Psalm 29. I said Psalm 24. If I did, I'm sorry. Psalm 29, verse 1. Give unto the Lord, O you mighty ones. Interesting term. Give unto the Lord glory and strength. Give unto the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. I want to stop there for a second because you've probably heard this scripture before, right? Give unto the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of his holiness. But we stop. Here's verse 3. Now I want you to notice there are seven thunders here. Seven thunders. You say, how do you identify them? Every time you see the phrase, the voice of the Lord, and by the way, there are seven of these, it's a thunder. So let's read verse 3. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord is over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks cedars. Yes, the Lord splinters the cedars of Lebanon. Wow, talk about power. Verse 6, he makes them also skip like a calf, Lebanon and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord divides the flames of fire. Oh boy. Doesn't that sound like Pentecost, folks? It does. Verse 8, the voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth and strips the forest bare. And in his temple, everyone says, oh, glory. I almost shouted it, but it's kind of late. I'm doing this on Thursday night. I almost just shouted glory. Can you imagine? And everyone says glory. And I hear the horns going. Verse 10, the Lord sat enthroned. Where? Ooh, at the flood. What? That's interesting. And the Lord sits, oh, I love this, as king forever. Verse 11, the Lord will give strength to his people, and the Lord will bless his people with peace. So let me bring this full circle, and I'll try to wrap this up. 7 thunders of the Lord went out prior to the big judgment, right? Now, there's other smaller pictures of judgment, but not judgment on the whole world. So I want you to make sure that you're following me on that, because you might sit there and scratch your head. Yes, God judged Sodom and Gomorrah, and yes, God judged some different, like Egypt and things like this. But for the scope and scale of what we're talking about here, folks, there are 2 major judgments. One is bookended. So one end of the rainbow, right? One end of the rainbow is Noah. What's the other end of the rainbow? It's going to be the tribulation when God judges the whole world. Are you following me? I hope so. Global, worldwide scale judgment. Revelation, same thing. So in the first judgment of Noah, this psalm tells us that there were the 7 thunders of the Lord. In other words, God picked up his battle weapon, figuratively, right? The bow, and began to strike the earth. There's other scriptures I didn't even get into, but the Lord strikes. Going back to Revelation 10:3, it says, chapter 10, verse 1, I saw a mighty angel coming down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was on his head. Uh-oh, what's happening? God's picking his bow, his divine bow back up. His face was like the sun, and his feet like pillars of fire. He had the book opened in his hand, and he sat at his right foot on the sea, and his left foot on the land. And he cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roars. Now, would that be loud? I think that would be pretty loud, to hear God like when a lion roars. And when he cried out, notice this now, 7 thunders uttered their voices. And here's the thing, verse 4. Now when the 7 thunders uttered their voices, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal it up. Seal it up and don't write them down. It's another topic for another time. But do you see the symmetry? Do you see the both ends of the rainbow now? And wouldn't it be cool if the horse Jesus rode in on had a horn? It'd be a unicorn. I'm teasing, right? That would be like, oh my. That'd be like the greatest troll of the century. All right, guys, there's more that we probably could have went into, and I probably have gone way too long. So I've got a challenge for you. If you made it this far, would you send me a text and say, I made it? That way I at least know I wasn't, talking to myself, or I hope I didn't completely wreck this. But anyway, happy Friday once again. Next time you see a rainbow, look at it in awe. Here's the couple of takeaways. Look at the rainbow and say, you know what? There's a rainbow up at the throne room of God right now. Because that's what Ezekiel saw, didn't he? And that's what John saw, didn't he? And then I also want you to remember that it's a sign of peace and it's a sign of grace, because God did put down his weapons. And it reminds us, so it's a sign of grace on that end, but very soon it's going to be a sign of judgment. With that, we'll see you on the next episode. And that was the wrong button. Thank you for listening to Al Pastor with Brian Overturf. If you found value in this, please subscribe and get updates most places podcasts are available. We're right here on Anchor FM through Spotify, also on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and iHeartRadio. I hope you'll tune in for the next episode. Until then, we'll see you later.